that takes us more smoothly to the internal discussions about how we are going to start crafting, positioning women's rights, the work on women law and development in a human rights framework, and what level of capacity development was needed. And Marge played quite a key role in that area. Would you like to explain?
Yes, of course. One of the things that struck me as there was a great mobilization toward women's rights or human rights related to the '93 conference. And so after that, one of the things that I noticed that people use the phrase a lot, but sometimes I got the feeling, again, I guess this is one of the issues that I always seem to work with. How can we define things that we understand certain words in the same way? And how, so women's rights are human rights. Okay, what do you do with that at a national level or an international level? So we came up with the idea to actually develop a book, a guide, sort of a handbook. And we did women's human rights step by step. And this also, I think this was a very important project because we had wonderful contributors who wrote, explained in very simple language, what were the main instruments, what were the mechanisms, how did that fit? How could women actually use the UN system through the instruments and mechanisms present to defend their rights? And how could they bring that down to the national level? It was basically to give people more of an international perspective on this. Because one of the things that we learned is that a lot of the lawyers, they didn't know much about international law related to the UN and the various conventions. So first we put this together, and I'm just going to just read the table of contents so you know. Definitions and explanation, international human rights. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2, the UN human rights system. What were the different mechanisms that would relate to women? And then chapter 3, regional systems. So there we could talk about, well, some regions didn't have, Asia didn't have particularly a regional mechanism, but that was explained in there. Chapter 4, national human rights systems. Chapter 5, human rights advocacy. And then how you use those mechanisms. Chapter 6, investigating violations. And here we had Dorothy Thomas, who was at Human Rights Watch at the time, also on our board. She developed that section. And then a step-by-step guide to human rights advocacy, sort of what you do. What is your issue? Where do you go from there? 1, 2, 3. So that's how this came about. And I will say that I've heard from other if this was done only for women, specifically targeted for women, but I've had men tell me that they've used this in training in other organizations that didn't relate to women, because it really has a good overview of how the UN system works. So from that, now we're getting into the whole area of capacity building. So now we have the basis. And the next step was to build a program, a training program, using all the methodologies we could that would encourage learning and that would engage the participants. because just going to a workshop and learning a few things isn't enough. So the idea was we would have these workshops, and then people would go back home and they would have to do certain things before the next time. So this was a whole course that was implemented over a period of a couple of years in each instance. So we did the first one in East Africa with Uganda and Tanzania, Rwanda. I forget the other countries, but that was, I think that was the first iteration. And then we were asked to work, and I haven't mentioned this before, but to work with women in Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, because remember, by the early 90s, most of those countries had split out. The Soviet Union didn't exist anymore, and there were all these independent countries. And so there was effort by a number of organizations to assist groups. I mean, there weren't NGOs in those countries before. And so they were just learning. And the thing about understanding human rights, that was another area. So we actually did a program over several years using this methodology and working with, I think we worked with like 20 women from 20 different countries. I mean, from Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, from Poland, that whole region. And that was also fun to get to know so many people. They did not ask to create a regional network per se, because in a way they were just beginning and just learning a number of things. So, I mean, some countries were more advanced, like Poland, but it was also interesting working with the women. This was after the war in the Balkans. So we had, included in this process were women from Croatia, from my mind is going blank, but you know what I mean. Those countries that have been engaged, the former Yugoslavia, in which they had been engaged in terrible conflict for a long time. So that was very interesting. I remember we had one workshop in Warsaw, and so one day we got on a bus and we drove down to Auschwitz and experienced that in a way that was a big part of learning. It was amazing. So just understanding human rights and violations and what can happen if people are not vigilant. So that was, and then I will just mention this, we received an anonymous grant, we never knew who it came from, to do a training of women sort of on a global level. And the training, we asked our members of our boards to recommend participants. So that's how the participants were selected, through the members of our board. And so there were 3 weeks of training with several months in between. The first was held in Bangladesh. And that was, again, it was just great because we had people coming from South America, from Africa, from Asia, and most had never had the opportunity, wouldn't have had the opportunity to visit a country like Bangladesh and understand Asia in a different way, South Asia in a different way than maybe they did. And then the second week of training, took place in Brazil, in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And then the final week took place in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And a wonderful woman from Nigeria, I miss very much because she passed away a couple of years ago, but Obi Nwanko, she pressed me for a very long time to come and do that training in Nigeria. She said, this is really what we need. And at that point, I couldn't raise any money for it, but she found the resources. And so at that point, I suggested, can we use two of the trainers who just finished the course and let them come and be the trainers? And so Jane Magigita from Tanzania. And then we had Virginia Fikes from Brazil. It was a little difficult, Virginia, because her English was okay, but it was a struggle for her to do the training. Nevertheless, she came and we went through that same process with Obi in Nigeria. So, and it was very interesting because we asked each of them also to write up, to select a strategy, start working on it. And many of them, they set goals like making sure that women were included at all kinds of different levels, because they saw that as a real hindrance for women, the fact that men were making all the decisions. I mean, I'm talking grassroots now, really grassroots. So, but anyway, that was the final sort of course of training that we gave. Unfortunately, because shortly thereafter, Women Law and Development closed, international, I mean, I was unable to follow what happened to the people who had received that training. I don't know if you know, Florence.
Yeah, I know some who participated and they have all done very well. They use that knowledge, they've become excellent trainers, including Jenny Magigita you've talked about. And of course, Obi Nwanko's initiative in Nigeria just took off. Christine here in Uganda has gone on to have to be an excellent trainer in human rights, although her background wasn't human rights. So definitely the trainings were intense, but they were absolutely fantastic in terms of grounding those core trainers in using the human rights framework at the different levels where they worked. But I think one of the most interesting thing is just the fact that the networks continued to exist and to work and to build capacities and across generations. I think that has got to be a legacy that you must be proud of, and the people you worked with must be proud of. And for many of the people we worked with, we have retained that personal contact even in our retirement.